All right. Good afternoon, Michael. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Bruce. How are you today, man?
I am doing very well. I'm very excited to get started with this webinar. I know we have quite a few people that are enrolling and joining, so we'll give them another minute.
Sounds good.
All right. How's the weather where you're at?
Well, it's in a word, it is hot in West Texas, but it's funny. Anytime there's like one drop of rain in the forecast, people really get in a tizzy. So over the weekend, they forecasted like flood watches and flood alerts and all this for basically starting last night. And as of 12 o'clock noon, we have not had a single drop of rain. So we're
All
trending
right.
trending perfectly. But no, but yeah, overall June it's hot here, so that's all right.
Y- Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. Well, it looks like it's one after, and we have quite a few people already in the room. So how about we get this started?
Let's do it.
Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's session. It's breaking the cycle of slow pay in construction. I'm Bruce Orr. I'm the CEO of ProNovos. I've spent the last decade focused on improving the construction industry, not just with better data, but with tools that protect profits and cash flow, which brings us to today's topic. Let me introduce you to someone I'm excited to have with us. It's Michael Marshall. Michael is the director of finance and a partner at Viva Capital. He oversees the company's financial strategy, the risk and performance. And before Viva, he served as, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think served as AVP at Capital Bank. And earlier, he was a legislative assistant to Speaker John Boehner, working on finance and homeland security policies and Stanford grad. Michael, such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, golly, it feels like a million years ago, but yeah, myself and my partners, we were all there's four operating partners. We were former commercial bankers. We joined a holding company in 2011 and 2012 that was buying banks in kind of the mountain region post Great Recession, and so we were tasked with essentially growing those distressed banks, essentially through C&I lending. So that's where we really got familiar intimately with the financing of the construction industry. Um, our bank essentially was harvested or merged. We grew the holding company to about 2 billion in assets, and then it was merged with another $2 billion bank back in 2017. And so at that point, my partners and I kind of wanted to be entrepreneurial, so we bought into Viva Capital, which is our operating company. Viva Capital has been in business since 1999. Historically, it was a factoring company operating almost exclusively in the transportation and oil field services sectors. Since we've joined, we've really kind of broadened the scope of what Viva does. Factoring is still kind of the core business, the engine of our business, if you will. But we've taken a lot of the skills and a lot of the insight that we gained in the banking world, and we've tried to kind of do some outside of the box things as it relates to factoring, and as it relates to construction. So we can get into that, but pleasure to be here, Bruce. Thank you.
No, no, I appreciate the background. I think it's really important for the audience to know who they're talking to. So here's what we're diving into today. And this isn't just a lecture. We're going to look at the root cause of cash flow problems in construction. We're going to show you how to spot early warning signs and, most importantly, walk you through a real world ways to fix them, whether it's technology, strategy, or smarter forecasting. So actually, I want to get to know the audience, and for anyone that has attended a webinar that I put on, I love learning. So I'm going to launch a quick poll here. Let's see. If you wouldn't mind, I just want to understand who we have in the audience. Which best describes your company? Are you a GC, specialty contractor? Just curious. Give that a few seconds here. All right. I'll just leave that up. Um, yeah, so these learning objectives is, I think, going to really make a difference. So it looks like primarily it's a mixture of GCs um, and subs. We have some professional people. All right, just going to close that. Okay. Well, you know, what's your biggest uh, cash flow challenge? I love to find out. We have such an interesting landscape right now in construction. We have rising costs for many reasons. We have tariffs. I think also I would like to learn from others. What are they most struggling with, or what are the problems? The reason why this poll has been launched back to back is because we have some really interesting statistics to share with you. For instance, in 2024, we just learned and got the numbers back that delayed payments impacted construction by about $280 billion. That was a statistic that I was floored with. It's increased quite a bit. The other statistic is it historically has impacted subcontractors, as you may know, but now it's impacting a larger percentage of GCs because of overhead issues. So I just wanted to grab this info here. All right. Well, so, Michael, I know that cash flow is still the most persistent issue in construction, and it's not for lack of effort. So, um, I want to break a few things down and why we're actually experiencing the issues we have. So you obviously have pay when paid clauses. They're everywhere. They've become the normal, but they weren't always this dominant. And the result, we have longer DSOs. Everyone seems to be floating some payments. You have the speed to capital, and I'd love to get your input on any or all of this, Michael. We know speed of capital has always been an issue. Access to credit facilities and rising costs. These common problems seem to be surfacing everywhere in my conversations with GCs. Now, Michael, from where you sit, what's causing the biggest slowdowns in cash flow, and what does that look like for subcontractors?
Well, I would say for subcontractors, unfortunately for subcontractors, they get a little bit of the all of the above, right? And so I think it is, it's a top down. So pay when paid in and of itself it's going to cause a blockage or a bottleneck in cash flow. And I don't want to get ahead, but it all kind of links together. Okay, so pay when paid is just the norm now in the construction industry. Okay, so then speed to capital. How quickly can you have access if you're a general contractor? How quickly, once you've consolidated your subcontractor pay apps, you've submitted to the owner, at some point it's a little bit out of your control, right? At that point, it's the owner, whether it's the owner financing the project or a financial institution financing the project on behalf of the owner. What we are seeing, and this is not just in the construction industry, we are just seeing a general intentional sluggishness, I think, in the banking industry at the moment. I think banks hate uncertainty. Banks hate unanswered questions. And so I think each day that a bank can hold on to its money before approving a general pay app and letting those funds out the door, the banks are going to do that. They're not going to give a reason. It's just every day that goes by, they are reducing they are unknown by just a little bit. And so they're taking advantage of that. And I think that's what causes the trickle down in the payment bottleneck right there.
Yeah, yeah. That it says a lot. I love this slide because while we understand greater day sales outstanding sometimes to understand how it operates higher up in the payment supply chain can kind of be somewhat difficult to understand. With this slide, Michael, I'm curious. When we factor in the owner, developer, the GCs, and the subs, and we look at this slide, what does this tell you? What is it that you would want the audience to know from this slide?
I would say, unfortunately, it tells me at the very first glance that priorities are not necessarily aligned in construction.
Mhm.
I think especially when you look at the general contractor bar in the middle, the general contractor is essentially they are basically a go-between between the owner and the subcontractor. They want their cycle as clean and as level as possible, right? You can see it right there. They know what they have an expected margin, they have an expected timeline and a project timing, and they don't want much deviation from that. They don't necessarily need they don't need any upside, they don't want any downside. They have determined what they're going to make on a project. That's what they want to make. But then you can kind of see, I mean, there's a lot of green in those kind of first two bars, the owner developer and the general contractor. So that means that there's some red somewhere, right? Um, and so unfortunately, as we know, you talked about earlier that everybody's kind of floating someone. Well, when you're at the bottom kind of this self-contained economy that is a pay when paid construction project, the sub is really who ends up kind of floating, the majority of that project, especially when you factor in the retention that they have to deal with. And then, I mean, it could be even worse if you're a sub that's kind of first in on a project. Let's say that you're, concrete on a tilt up warehouse, and you're done 30% into the timeline of the project, you're done, and your retention's being held, so again, this pay when paid, it forces GCs and it forces everyone underneath the owner to have to figure out a way to pay for all of the overhead and the labor and the materials and all of the mobilization before the owner releases funds. And so you'll see this is how it's funded.
Yeah, I love this slide. It does show such a good depiction of the cycle and who's carrying most. Um, in terms of other warning signs with pay when paid and just with the slow pay in construction, I'm curious if there's anything that comes to mind that you can that you observe most frequently.
As it relates specifically to construction, I'm sorry, as it relates not specifically to construction, I think anytime there's always going to be isolated. If you're looking at your accounts receivable aging, for example, and this would be true in our factoring business, this would be true for a general contractor looking at their accounts receivable aging. It's it's pretty much a guaranteed. You're going to have some sort of, not every project is going to go perfectly according to the timeline. We're not going to collect on every invoice exactly when we should in our factoring business. So it's okay to have, isolated incidents of projects moving to the right, of accounts receivable moving to the right, meaning aging out slightly over what you would expect. But I think when you start to see groups of projects or, groups of projects that aren't necessarily linked by anything, they're not the same owner, they're not geographically the same. It's not like all of your projects are in Denver and Denver had a huge blizzard. Okay, of course that's going to get aged out. Or what, you're doing 3 deals with Marriott and Marriott had a cyber attack. Okay, that's going to get aged out. But when you start to see groupings of AR moving to the right that aren't necessarily linked by anything, that could be an indicator of, like we've talked about, bank tightening, delays of payments from bank to owner, which means delays of payments from owner to general. And that, I think, just keeping a really tight eye on your accounts receivable aging and looking kind of for patterns or looking for groupings that shouldn't be there is one. One that I think is obvious, very specific to the construction industry and is a little bit counterintuitive. Not that it's a warning sign that you have stress, but it can lead to unintended stress is, and we've actually seen this in a real life example with someone that we know well, but is change orders.
Mm.
For a lot of, I think the thought is with change orders, is that, oh, it's a great thing for the general and or the sub. It means that the contract, the value of the contract has increased. It's 100% applicable to the owner. That's great. That's going to increase margin. It's a way to boost margin on these changes. And that's all great. And if everything goes perfectly, that is how it works. But what change orders also can do is cause delays. Essentially, that means that the owner probably hasn't fully decided what they want. Their design build might not be fully done. And so change orders, I think there's like a false sense of security that, hey, we're going to boost margin. But I think as soon as you start to see change orders, a light bulb or a bell has to go off in your head like, hey, this is going to cause a delay one way or another. So I need to be ready for that. I need to plan for that. And I'm going to end up with more cash at the end of the day, but it might take me a little bit longer to get there. And so I think that's kind of what you were talking about earlier about planning ahead, thinking ahead. And okay, if you have 10 projects going and one or two have change orders that are going to cause delays, okay, well, the other 8 are going to be smooth. That's fine. We can work on that. But I think just being aware of the potential delays in payment that really are outside of your control, and planning for that is super important.
Well, so because we're talking about early warning signs, what we are essentially saying is we want to stay ahead of problems before they occur. The concept of forecasting um, is uh, essentially helping us sort of see into the future. And when you have visibility and into these early warning signs, um, I'm curious, based on your experience, how does visibility and forecasting impact the contractor's funding options? If if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a general contractor, if you do have access to a commercial line of credit tied to your accounts receivable, that line of credit is hopefully being used correctly. It's what the trap that is so easy to fall into is essentially financing project delays with your operating line that's tied to AR. And financing project delays mean you're not having to pay your subs. Your subs are on pay when paid. So you haven't paid your subs, but financing your overhead essentially. And the issue with that is, okay, let's say you're able to borrow 80% on your AR that's eligible. I'm just going to say 60 days or less. Okay. So, okay, you're behind a week payment cycle from an owner. No problem, but you've got your payroll coming up. So you tap your line of credit. Okay, there's an issue, there's a change order. Now it's 2 or 3 weeks. Well, now you're starting to see AR kind of get a little bit too close to that 60-day mark. And so as it comes back to forecasting, having it so as I kind of mentioned earlier, having it so that if you can identify potential stress, hopefully with just one project, hopefully with just 2 projects, and you can use, some of the operating cash flow that you're receiving on these other projects to help smooth it out so that you can really use your operating line of credit, hopefully, if there's one available, to really finance the AR and not finance overhead. I think that is just a really important tool. And then also forecasting allows you hopefully to know within a certain reasonable time frame when you're going to get paid. When you're doing forecasting for a project or when you're bidding a project, if whether it's an owner that you worked with before or it's a new owner, having an understanding of, okay, if we bill on these days, based on this owner, based on the contract, we should receive payment on X day.
Mhm.
And that's very important to have a good understanding of when that expected payment date is, not only so that you know what your obligations are to your subs, how you're going to cover your own costs and your overhead. But then also, if you get past that day, it's a phone call. It's a, hey, what's going on? We're past. It should have been, the first, and it's the sixth. What's going on? And if you don't have an understanding of when you're supposed to be paid, how could you ever know when you're behind, right? And by that point, it's too late.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, and that is one of the reasons why we focus so much on anticipated payment days. We want to help our clients understand when they should um, really expect to get paid, not what the terms are, but you know reality. And so I think
Exactly.
that's really important. We've talked about the problem, and what I want to do now is walk through an example of how improving data flow and payment timing can impact the job performance. And here's what we typically see. We see billing delays, disconnected systems. The finance team is chasing down payments. Um, you know, However, um, if you look at the right side, when you have accurate AR forecasting, we have insight on like which move to make in terms of your payment options. It makes it easier. You are being proactive and then able to absorb isolated project pressure points. I think that we understand the impact of trying to be more agile from a payment perspective. Again, $280 billion this problem caused us last year as an industry. Michael, when you see a contractor moving from left to right, what's changing for them financially?
Yeah, it's funny the way that this slide worked out. I think on the right side, the after, I think it's a chronological 1, 2, 3. So if you have a contractor that's able to implement accurate AR forecasting, right? Like we said, they should have a reasonable idea of when they're going to get paid. And hopefully they are being paid on or near that time. But if they're not, if for some reason they're behind, but hopefully they're not behind on every project, then I think what they'll have the ability to do is say, okay, I am outside of my expected date on project X, but I am in perfect position on Y and Z. Okay, so that means that I have isolated stress. I don't have full portfolio stress. I have isolated stress. So I need to pull this lever. And that lever, there's several financial levers that you could pull, but something that we talk about a lot in our business is matching your financing timeline. So you want to match short-term problems with short-term
Mhm.
liabilities. You hopefully can match longer term. Hopefully there are no longer term systemic problems, but longer term problems require longer term liabilities. It's when you start using short term liabilities to fix long term problems or systemic larger problems that you can really get into trouble. But I think starting with number one, implementing accurate AR forecasting, that gives you insight into where your stress is. And hopefully it's isolated. But that also gives you insight into, okay, is this a short-term stress? Is this a long-term stress? Is this a project stress or an owner stress? Or is this, you know what? Um, the the owner, the bank was delayed because they couldn't get an inspector out, something like that. That's short
Mhm.
term. That is something that you can pull the correct lever. So 1 and 2 leads to 3, and that's being able to absorb pressure. That's being able to absorb stress on isolated projects, which I mean, everyone who's logged in right now knows. I mean, there's not, hopefully it's isolated, but there are going to be projects that are stressful. There are going to be projects that put you under strain, and that's going to be for you, that's going to be for your subs. But hopefully, if 1 and 2 are accomplished, it provides hopefully the ability to absorb that stress.
Yeah. I want to be mindful of the people that are entering questions, and I want to grab one of the questions here. The concept of funding one project with another project's cash flow scares me. Would you clarify that concept, saying profits from one project helping another project?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely don't mean diverting project funds from an owner to pay
Right.
anything related to another project. I mean that if you have delays on one project, the one thing that keeps going for a general, if you're on a pay when paid, Your subs, unfortunately, have to wait until you get paid. But one thing that doesn't stop is your overhead, right? And so if you are getting delayed on project B, project A is, or hopefully projects A, C, D, E, F, G are on schedule. Hopefully there is enough operating profit, operating cash flow to cover the overhead that you have allocated to project B without having to tap some sort of a liability, bank line of credit, credit card, early pay, something along those lines. So definitely not using funds from one owner to pay subs on a different project or anything like that. But I just mean that your overall kind of corporate G&A, your overhead, hopefully you have enough projects that are stress-free to allow you to basically continue to cover the overhead allocated to the stressful project. Sorry, that's what I meant.
No, it makes sense. That was a great question. I think sometimes because of the payment chain, you just need financing to come from somewhere else, not just jobs. And most often this happens outside of the system. I think that everything leads back to the whip. In my opinion, all roads lead back to the whip. So if you can forecast and you can anticipate when you need early payment, well then why not just be in your whip and see, which projects are eligible for quick pay? I think having a seamless access to something like a quick pay directly within your financial intelligence system is powerful. So here's an example. If I'm a general contractor and I know which projects I'm running for quick pay, well, maybe at that point, I need something like a vendor scorecard or something that I could look at to say who should be eligible on my project for quick pay. So if I just take a look at the project, this project, we have just embedded a whole slew of payment options here. So if I go to payables on this project, I see which subcontractors that is participating in quick pay. From within the application, I think it's important to also know, if you have some longer delays on bills for whatever reason, and your sub wants a discount, let them request a discount. So from within here, we submit all the payment apps, and we know how much we are going to provide to a subcontractor. And
Bruce,
again,
but no, don't want to interrupt you. I'm still seeing payment cycle improvements. I'm not sure if everyone else is.
okay. Yep, sorry about that. Let me quickly share my screen again. Here we go. All right, how about now?
There we go.
All right, yeah. So again, directly from the whip, we need to see which payments, which projects are set up for quick pay. You select the project, and now you will come to something like this. I know that right now I have $671,000 in outstanding AP. For the vendors and the subcontractors that are eligible, I think what we want to do is extend an early payment option for them. Let us fund this for you. Let us keep the project flowing. I think that when you start considering the combination of technology and capital, it changes the game for construction. Another statistic that I want to quickly throw out is 14%. The late payments impacted our industry by 14% of the cost that was spent. I think that is huge. And we're trying to tackle that. And so, Michael, when we think about a strategy for trying to come up with a payment option to be more proactive versus reactive, I'm curious, what comes to mind for you? Like, what are the options that you think a contractor should have?
Well, sure. I mean, in a perfect world, like we talked about, a commercial line of credit tied to your accounts receivable is, a low cost, pretty high advance way to have funding. Now, not everyone is going to have that. There are barriers to achieving or to obtaining one of those. But that is a very helpful and useful tool in an arsenal. And then really, I think, there's from a general contractor perspective, the ability to provide your subcontractors access to quick pay, to earlier and it's not only an earlier payment, it's a set payment date. It's certainty for the subcontractor. And I think that's just as important as the early payment.
Mhm.
The ability for the we can all, understand the subcontractor is financing their pay up with the general somewhere already, right? I mean, it's being financed, whether it's through supplier terms that they're getting from their supplier, whether it's through credit cards, whether it's through personal loans, business loans, it's being financed somewhere. And so I think for a subcontractor, if the general has a way to provide certainty or a level of certainty around when they're going to get paid through a form of, a quick pay program, especially if it can be integrated in their, financial, accounts receivable software, then I think that's just a very, very, it elevates the general contractor. I would say it separates the general contractor. And I think it's a way to build subcontractor loyalty. It's a way to get subs to be more competitive on their bids because they want to be on your projects, because on your projects with the right owners, you're going to offer quick pay. And then also, taking, getting away from kind of the financing side, it also can be a way to boost margin. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it.
Ye- Yeah, actually, there are again quite a few questions, and I'm going to pick a few of these here. How do late payments affect pre-qualifying subs? If we know that an owner will pay slowly, we may need to choose larger subs for our jobs that may be more expensive, impacting our fee. I mean, it's a great observation, and again, the question is, how do late payments affect pre-qualifying subs?
Well, if you know ahead of time, that an owner is just a notoriously slow payer, or if they work with a bank that's a notoriously slow payer, that's just that's a that's a risk that you have to weigh when you're bidding the project, right? I mean, that's okay. So if it's an owner that's really strong, but they're just a slower pay, this is a project we want to do. Okay, yes, we might have to go with the more expensive subs. Maybe we do accept a squeeze on our margin. In a funny way, I think that's where quick pay can absolutely be super important because it is a way to boost margin. And it's a way to boost margin while I think providing a benefit and giving your subcontractors something that they will ultimately want and enjoy, like be excited that they have access to. So yes, I mean there's no two ways around it. A slower pay on a job is going, even if you know it ahead of time, it's going to impact margin. But hopefully you have the forecasting in place like Bruce has talked about, so that you know that, hey, this job A, I'm not going to get paid in my expected days. It's going to be plus 10, or it's going to be plus 15, or it's going to be plus 20. But if you know that ahead of time and you know that you're confident that you can finance it because projects B through D, B through F are all going to be kind of within this expected timeline. And then, hey, if I do get into a bind, I have a line of credit. I have access to quick pay, or I can provide my subs access to quick pay. That's why the forecasting is so important. It's knowing before you get into the project, not finding out, three pay apps in, like, oh man, like I'm going to get paid 20 days late every single time, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. You mentioned the term boosting margins several times. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. So specifically I'll give you a little bit of background in the factoring industry. One of the industries that factoring is kind of a no-no is, generally speaking, is construction. Um, Traditional factoring, general contractors hate it. A factoring company essentially inserts themselves into kind of the sub-general relationship, tries to assign pay apps, tries to get in the middle of a payment stream. The general really has no relationship with the factor, couldn't care less who the factor is. They really just want to deal with their sub because they know their sub, the sub matters to the project. The factor, so just if you ask any factoring company, hey, what's an industry you don't do business with? Oh, it's construction. It's like a big no-no. You don't do construction factoring. Well, we like the construction industry. And so we came up with a way. It's it's basically it's reverse factoring, it's construction quick pay, where we partner with the general contractor and we essentially become their quick pay arm. And so if a general decides to offer quick pay on a certain project, subs can accept or not accept the quick pay. It is not mandatory. So, but if a general makes quick pay available on a certain project, the sub, through ProNovos can see, hey, quick pay is eligible on project A. And I know that once if I enroll in quick pay or I accept quick pay, I'm going to take a small discount, 1.5 to 3%, depending on the project, depending on the sub, depending on the owner. And I'm pretty much guaranteed that I'm going to be paid as soon as my pay app's approved. When I've submitted my pay app into the general contractor, my work's been approved, I'm going to be paid then. And it's not like I'm only going to get 80% now and I'm going to get the other 20. No, you're going to get your full 98.5 or 97% now. You're done. You can go on and continue to work on your other projects. You can buy materials. It's a way to create certainty for the subcontractors. But then on the back end, okay, Viva Capital through ProNovos has paid the subcontractor, the sub accepted quick pay. They took let's just say their 3% discount. So they received their 97%. So now the general contractor, Viva has now taken the place of the sub, but because the general and Viva Capital and through ProNovos are aligned, there's not this adversarial relationship. And so when the general does get paid by the owner, they then pay their normal. Let's say it was a $100,000 pay app, the sub receives 97,000 once approved. The owner pays the general still owes that 100,000 to Viva. So there's no change in accounting. It's not like a different amount is owed. It's really risk neutral. The general owed that $100,000 to the sub. If Viva didn't exist, that 100,000 was owed. So it's really risk neutral for the general. But then what we do is, depending on how quickly the general pays that pay app to Viva, if it's within a certain amount of time, we will share a portion of that 3% with the general, essentially at the end of every month. So there is a revenue share kind of part of the quick pay program. And, I will tell you that we have seen general contractors, we have general contractors using the program that their annual, profit share from their portion of that discount, it can be, very high six-figure annual dollar amounts, which can, especially for small and medium-sized general contractors, that's a huge boost to margin. And so yeah, we've seen great success with the product. I think initially there's this idea that subs won't accept it, or that generals don't want to make their subs feel like they have to take a discount. It is completely optional. It is not the general grinding the sub. It's not like the general saying, hey, you have to take quick pay, or hey, we're going to do the quick pay. The general's already, the general's grinding in a nice way. The general's grinding the sub on their bid, right? And then 6 months later, the general's like, oh, by the way, I can pay you quicker if you want. Just take quick pay. And the sub's like, well, what the heck, man? You already grinded me on my bid, but now you're saying you can pay me. You're just choosing not to pay me. No, so that's not what it is. We are, we're a third party partnering with the general contractor, and we're keeping it risk neutral for the general, giving the opportunity to kind of share in that discount, but also giving the subcontractor payment certainty. So we feel like it kind of is a win-win-win, honestly, a win for the sub, a win for the general, and a win for kind of Viva Capital through ProNovos. So that's the kind of 30,000 feet, very quick of the quick pay product.
No, hence boosting margins. So I appreciate that. There's this notion now, and I'm a man that loves trends, and I love watching trends and see them develop. A trend that we are seeing that is growing rapidly is contractors, GCs, and subs are already including the cost for late payment in their bids. So I know many subcontractors that will take an early payment option if it's available, mainly because they are already considering that in their margin. So I love that, Mike. Michael, I have one other question. We use owner contracts that have a clause that allows us to charge interest on late payments. That's excellent. Yet I don't know any of our GC competitors that charge owners for late payments. Why is that? If you have an answer.
Oh man, that I wish that I could implement that on all of the industries that we do business with. It's funny, Bruce, we were talking about pay when paid. It's really interesting, and you would know so much better than I would kind of the history of how pay when paid became this all-encompassing, like automatic way to do business in the construction industry. But no, I mean, I think because I hate to say it, but in some ways, the construction industry is a little bit of an industry of distrust, right? Historically. Hopefully, we're getting away from that.
Yeah.
But everybody kind of operates with this general idea that there's a little bit of distrust. I think a lot of times the sub kind of always feels, hey, the general could pay me quicker if he wanted to, right? The general's like, if you ask the general, hey, are you a good payer? Yes, I pay immediately once I get paid by the owner. But it's it's the owner that's slow, right? So there's always this general distrust up. The sub kind of thinks, okay, my GC could pay me better. My GC is like, oh no, my owner is totally holding funds. They're slowing me down. And then if you ask the owner's like, hey, my hands are tied. I'm doing everything I can. It's my bank. So I think there's just kind of always somebody to pass the buck to, you know. And so hopefully there are enough tools and there are enough solutions that generals can have to alleviate that, right? To be able to deal with that. But no, golly, I mean, that would be, I don't know how, and Bruce, you might know as well, but I'm not familiar with contracts where you'd be able to charge the owner kind of for late payment. Cause I think it's something, like I said, I think the owner would always just say, well, hey, I'm not paying you late. I haven't been paid, I haven't had my funds released. So I think it's a
Yes.
tricky one.
Yes. Yes. No, great point. And and I do think it's fair. I was reading something the other day, and it was basically saying, would you go work for someone if you don't know when you're going to get paid? Like I'm just kind of speaking of from a subcontractor's
Mhm.
perspective, right? Like if I'm a consultant and I'm going to do work for you, Michael, I think that if I don't know when I'm going to get paid, somewhere between 90 days and 150 days, I probably you'll be the last person I probably come to do work.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that it just goes to underscore the importance of keeping a tight relationship with your trade partners. And when
Mhm.
we think of options for financing, there are many options out here. We laid out a matrix, and we could share this if anyone's interested in the slides. We'll share this with you. But there are things you have to ask yourself when you're preparing and strategically laying out a payment strategy for this year, next year, or the years to come. Michael, when you look at this matrix, I'm curious, what is the main takeaway that you would have the audience wanting to know about this?
Well, I think it's important to know that there are solutions out there. Not all of these options are created equal in terms of cost, in terms of accessibility, in terms of, if I would all the time recommend using them. But it's good to know that there are options out there, right? Um, like I said, we kind of talked about invoice factoring on the far right. I think we threw that in there because we at our core are a factoring company, but you know, there's a little note there that says, general may lose invoice control.
Mhm.
I think in a lot of senses, generals, if they are familiar with subs trying to factor their invoices, hopefully that's not one that you're having to entertain. But for the rest, I think some of these have are very helpful and useful tools for financing. Business line of credit, supplier terms, those are both excellent. Um, but I hope that what we've outlined here is that QuickPay is just another potential tool. It doesn't necessarily replace the other options. It's just an additional tool. And I think it's an additional tool that, like I said, can really be beneficial for all three parties. It's risk neutral. The same dollar amount you owed your sub is still owed for the general. So it's not an accounting issue. It's not like you're having to, you are not having to deal with that discount. The gross amount of the pay app is the gross amount that's owed. Um, in terms of the ability to turn it around quickly, it's not a cumbersome process. It's not like applying for a bank line of credit that could take weeks or even months to obtain. It really does build loyalty with your subs. We have seen generals that have the same subs always trying to bid on their projects because they want to be able to have access to quick pay. And these are large subs. I know sometimes we hear the general say, "Oh, only a sub that's really struggling or only a sub that has no other options would take quick pay." And I'll
Mhm.
just tell you from experience that is not the case. We see some of our general contractors' largest subcontractors taking quick pay because, like I said, it provides certainty, and they're already financing their pay apps somewhere. They are covering it somewhere. And so if they can know ahead of time, hey, my discount is going to be 2%, my discount's going to be 3%, but I know I'm getting paid on the 15th, then that means that they can go, maybe they can buy bulk supplies and save 25% on their materials. Maybe they can go and pay off high interest credit cards that they've been using to carry their projects beforehand. Um, and then the other thing is this, subs have generally speaking, because of that slide that we showed earlier, how all of their cash is kind of weighted towards the end of a project, the sub does end up with a higher margin. So there is enough margin there for a well-heeled sub to be able to absorb that discount because they have certainty of payment. So, like I said, this is not to say that quick pay replaces all of these other options, but it's just showing that it is a complementary tool for a general contractor to be able to have and as an offering.
Well, I think, and I love how we laid this all out, right? So you gotta factor in funding speed. How quickly do you need it? Like, do you require debt? And if you're okay with acquiring debt, maybe lines of credit or short-term loans. If you wanted to be risk neutral to both GCs and subs, this is a great option. Margin share, you've already talked about it. Improving sub relationship. I don't know of many GCs that are thinking like this, right? How can we come up with a payment strategy to improve our trade partners' relationship that we have? And again, a lot of these are neutral, but gosh, when you have something like QuickPay, it will definitely impact. And then best for, I love this. Again, if anyone wants this slide, we'll gladly send it to you. But those are just some financing options there. Um, you know, the key takeaways here, I think, is the the trend is telling us that payment cycles are getting longer and it's costing the industry. I'll say it again, $208 billion is what it cost us last year as an industry. And options are needed. And Michael, we've ran through a lot on the call on this webinar, and I wonder what key takeaways you feel that the audience should be aware of as we sort of round the corner to wrap this up.
Yeah, man, I was just as you were talking, I was thinking back. I feel like I've said a lot of words in 48 minutes, so I apologize if I've been verbose or talked too fast. But I think the couple things that I want to kind of recap and hit on. Pay when paid, because it's a each project of that is pay when paid is a self-contained economy, right? You have a contract value. The value of this project is, let's just say, $10 million. That $10 million stays in the project, right? And so we have to find a way around the bottlenecks that are naturally going to occur when it's a closed loop, when it's like, it's like a terrarium. This is its own little economy. Second thing, banks are tightening. We are seeing it for us, we are seeing it for our clients outside of the construction industry. You flip on Fox News or CNN or whatever news you enjoy, The Economist, uncertainty around the world, banks don't like it. They're going to tighten. They're going to try to hold on to your money. I'll never forget an executive at the bank. He always just seemed to ask one more question. And we got really frustrated. We were like, man, like when is he going to have enough information to make a decision? That is banking. They want 100% of the answers and 100% of the information before they have to make a decision, before they have to release funds. So let's just know that ahead of time. Let's know that there are going to be payment delays from bank to owner to general to sub. Okay, so now how do we get around it? We have accurate AR forecasting, right? Hopefully you have a tool like ProNovos so that you have a pretty good idea of when you should be paid, assuming you're doing your job correctly. Okay, so once you have that, now you need to have kind of tools in your arsenal so that you can pull the correct financing levers depending on the type of stress that you have, right? Do you have isolated stress on a certain project? Do you have stress because your subs are hounding you to get paid? Those are different issues. And so then that matrix that we showed, hopefully that you have one or more of these options available, but then really would like for everyone to understand that, the product that we have, this quick pay product that we have that we offer through ProNovos, it is just an additional tool that will build sub loyalty, that will ease the bottleneck of cash flows, especially for your subs and also for you, the general, and then can also help improve margin. So it's a tool that we are trying to kind of bring to the broader market and how people understand like, hey, this is available. This is something that exists, that can really be a win for the general and the sub and for that relationship. So those are my key takeaways.
You know, I think that I love how it's optional, risk neutral, and the commitment is minimum, but it can have a tremendous impact. I think for anyone out there, if you want to learn more about QuickPay and how this can help you, please take a few minutes and answer the poll. Um, I believe that this could be very beneficial to you, so I'm going to leave that up just a second here, and you know. I didn't get a chance to get to some of the questions. I'm curious. Here's one. What's the typical contractor size that you work with, or that sorry, what's the typical contract size that's ideal for quick pay clients?
Yeah, sure. So, two parts to that question. I would say so far where we've seen the most acceptance of the quick pay program and B, the most success of the quick pay program is general contractors that are doing annual contract revenue of, you know, 10, 15 to 200 million, kind of that small, medium size. And then And the reason for that is, you know, when a general comes to us, or we are working with a general on trying to implement quick pay, we might not be able to offer quick pay on every project because of the owner. If Bruce if Bruce is a general contractor and we're going to work with him on quick pay and he comes to us and says, hey, I want to offer quick pay on, I'm building a self-storage facility. I might say, that's great. Who are you building it for? Is it CubeSmart? Is it Storage Max? Oh no, it's my cousin. Okay, well, we might not offer quick pay on Bruce's cousin's self-storage deal, but if it's Storage Max or if it's CubeSmart, then yes. So I say that because generally speaking, the quick pay program works really well on contract sizes, you know, 2 to 25 million. It could work on larger contracts, but we've generally seen more success with small to medium sized GCs that are working on, they might be building schools for a school district, a $30 million school for a school district. They might be doing gas stations for 7-Eleven. So that's a smaller contract size, but that's a really strong owner. They might be working on self-storage facilities for a publicly traded self-storage, things like that. So I think what generals see once they get going in the project, like I said, is that their most important subs can really benefit from the program. But yeah, I think small to medium sized GCs working on, I would say, small to medium sized contracts is where we've seen the most acceptance and the most success.
Why is 200 million the sort of higher end of this? What is it that contractors that are greater than
Yeah.
200 million are doing?
Well, a couple things. I'll be very honest. Once you have a GC that reaches a certain scale, if they are open to the idea of quick pay and they want to offer it, usually they can do it themselves. It's something they can do on balance sheet for themselves, right? They can have their own quick pay program. And I'm sure that people on this call know of generals, or maybe they are a general that offers their own, early pay or quick pay for their subs. And that's okay. That's great. That's a tool. But like I said, I think one of the benefits of having the quick pay program come from a third party is it eliminates the distrust between the sub and the general. The sub doesn't think, hey, you could be paying me earlier. You do have the cash to pay me earlier. You're choosing not to unless you squeeze me more on my margin. No, no, no. This is a third party. Viva Capital through ProNovos is funding the quick pay program. I'm not taking advantage of you. But anyway, so yes, once you reach a certain scale and a certain size, one of two things happen. The general, if they want to do it, can do it on their own. But then B, what we've seen also is when we do have some kind of larger generals that use the product and have been very successful. But then once you also get into a very large GC, you have a lot of oversight and a lot of people on the back end in these accounting and these controller departments. And it can just be more difficult to have um, a streamlined implementation of the quick pay program when your accounts payable department and the controller overseeing it and the CFO overseeing it. When it gets to just be a massive operation, like I said, at some point they're just going to decide to do it themselves. That's what we've seen.
That makes sense. Well, I appreciate everyone that joined. If I didn't get a chance to get to all of the questions, I'll definitely send an email with answers to that. Um, this has been a very, I think, rich conversation. No matter what we're looking at in terms of the construction landscape, the financial component is so important, and I think we're all doing this to not only provide a good living for ourselves and our families, but we're also trying to do it frictionless. And anywhere I think we can remove friction, we should do that. And from where I sit, slow pay is creating a lot of challenges and a lot of friction for us, and we need tools like quick pay to help with that. So if anyone out there wants to ever connect and talk, our contact info is on the screen. Love to hear from you. And I'm a firm believer in, if I can give you just 3 minutes back of your time, I will do that. Michael, I really appreciate you joining the conversation and telling us all about the slow pay issues and the benefits of getting past slow pay. So again, thank you, sir.
No, I love being with you. Thanks, Bruce. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, everyone who joined. And yeah, if there's any questions, if there's anything that we talked about that you have questions on, if you want to learn more about Viva Capital, learn more about ProNovos, please reach out. It could be as simple as shooting off an email, give us a call. Love to talk more. So thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.